Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker. With us, we have Josef Bastian and Steve Sadler with their Folktellers universe. I met Josef Bastian about 5 years ago. At the time, he was still working on the Nain Rouge series of young adult books based on an old Detroit legend, and he brought the graphic novel of the series to Bookfest Windsor. Not long after that, he began creating and writing his Folktellers series of young adult novels. Today, Joe has finished writing his first series of Folkteller books. The first book has been out for a year and sold 12,000 copies. It's won multiple awards, and the entire series has been picked up by Reading is Fundamental, or RIF, a national reading organization in the U.S. A national book deal for the rest of the series is in the works. While all that has been happening, Joe and his partner Steve Sadler have been making multiple trips to Los Angeles, working with producers and production companies on the next phase of the transmedia platform for Folktellers universe. They've stopped by to talk with us today about what's happening and how they got here. Welcome, Joe and Steve. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. One of the things I love about Folktellers is that it takes like familiar types of stories that we all love and flips them on their head. Instead of like a Doctor Who traveling through space and time, or a Star Trek where the power is science, or even a Harry Potter series where the power is magic, in Folktellers, the power is the stories themselves. Storytelling is the magical force in this universe, and the characters have to collect and protect a powerful book of stories from dark forces. So how did that whole approach or idea come to you, Joe?
Oh, well, let's see. Well, you had said it. So this all started with the Nain Rouge, the Red Dwarf of Detroit. And about 12 years ago, when the economy was not so great in this region, I came across this legend. And I grew up in the Detroit area, and I'd never heard of the Nain Rouge before. And I started asking other people. I was like, have you heard of this legend, the Nain Rouge? And nobody knew what I was talking about. So I started to dig deeper into the legend and found out that it was over 300 years old, and it came over when the French founded Detroit. And it was kind of an alignment. It was like something in the universe said, you need to explore this. So it seemed to me to be a really good opportunity to take this old, lost folklore, and to bring it to the modern world. So that's kind of how everything started. So I'm like, well, I'll write a book about it, and I wanted it to be for kids, for middle grade, young adult, but that it's something that adults would enjoy too. And so I did the first book, and it got a lot of press, so I did a second and a third, so it ended up being a trilogy. And so from that, as I'm writing, I'm like, you know what, there's something here that's not just about this region. There's got to be other regional folk tales and stories around the world that are suffering from the same thing, where they've gotten lost to history, but that they're compelling enough that it would resonate with the modern audience. And so I started to do more research, like globally, in these types of what I was finding was what happens with old stories. Either they get trapped in the region and the people in the region keep them, but they're never really shared outside of the region, or they get lost and forgotten. And they don't get lost and forgotten because they're not any good. They get lost or forgotten because people move away and the oral tradition's not there, and the society changes. So that was sort of the genesis of it all. And I remember one of our other folktellers, Carl Winans, I basically did a one-page concept sheet, and I'm like, this is something big. It's bigger than I can even imagine, and I'm like, I can't do this alone, and I needed someone who had a different point of view. And so I said, I want to take you out to dinner, and I want to pitch you this concept, and It's just an idea. And so I pitched the idea, and part of my initial pitch was, this can't just be, it's about stories. So it's not necessarily about specific outputs. I happen to be a writer of literature, so I write books because that's what I do. But for this, it was about the stories, and I'm like, as we bring this to the modern world, people are interacting and engaging with stories in a different way. Some people like to read, some people play video games, some people want to watch a movie, some, there's all these different things, and there seems to be more and more all the time. So my vision, the big vision of this storytelling universe, was how could we bring in other master storytellers in their own craft to launch this in a transmedia way. And, that's sort of in that thinking moving forward. I met Steve, and he had he's a whole different type of storyteller. But it's funny so I was doing a pitch to raise money. I know this is very stream of consciousness. So I was doing a pitch to raise money to produce some of these things. And Steve was brought in. I didn't know him. And he sat there with his arms folded, looking very intently at the screen. And I was like, either this guy is checked out or he's really, really interested. And after the meeting, he came over to me. He said, just very directly, he was like, why don't we take this to Hollywood, like, now? And I was like, okay. Well, I was kind of thinking more of a linear approach, like, let's get the books out. And then he's like, no. He goes, this is compelling. And our friendship has blossomed since, and we've done a lot of cool things. That was almost 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. So that's sort of the long-winded answer of the genesis of all this, and it's just been fascinating. It's been a fascinating journey, and we're far from the journey being over.
Well, that is kind of a radical concept to kind of develop everything in sort of a concurrent path, as opposed to doing the book series first and then developing the films or whatever comes out of it, and then whatever after that. Why is that working for you? How is it working for you?
Well, I'm going to defer to Steve, but here's what I will say is, all along, when people say, well, what's it like? What's this? Because it's a big concept. And I always say, if you think of the Marvel Universe, and people get that, the Marvel Universe, and it exists in a certain space and time, and there's different characters that have different storylines, but their storylines interact. What I tell people is the Marvel Universe is an afterthought. The Marvel Universe wasn't designed on purpose. What happened was, in the 1960s, you had comic book writers who were like, hey, why don't we cross the storyline of the Hulk and Spider-Man? And they did, and they're like, whoa, that was cool, and everyone loved it. Let's do it again and again. So over time, you got into the 70s, you look back, and it's like, wow, we've actually created this universe with all these storylines that interweave, and it all makes sense together in the scope of this overall universe. Well, that was an afterthought. They just labeled it a universe, when actually it wasn't. And I said, what if you did that on purpose? What if going in, you're just starting to craft and launch these stories? What if you consciously, proactively looked at how you are going to tell these stories, and to take a transmedia approach where, depending on, the story's the same, but you'll get a different experience depending on the medium that you're engaging with, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And this is where Steve comes in, because me as coming more from literature and book writing, Steve's point of view is more from a media, new media, or a transmedia, or whatever you want to call it, vision. And so why don't you tell them, like, when you saw that pitch, mm-hmm. what was rolling around in your head?
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about transmedia storytelling as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let me just start by saying, like, when I first met Joseph, I just got off a plane. I literally, it was probably, 2 or 3 hours from DTW. And I had a friend of mine call me and said, hey, you got to come to this investors meeting. I'm like, well, what is it? And so he kind of gave me the high level. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll check it out. And the reason that I got off a plane is because I had been doing a lot of digital marketing and digital strategy for Disney, DreamWorks, Awesomeness TV Done about 60 movies for Disney, about 7 for DreamWorks through Awesomeness. And in the process of doing that and flying back and forth, I'd actually also written a couple of books myself. And nothing that I really wanted to publish and push. It was more like a release just to get the stories out. So because I had just done that, when I met him, it's like, here's an author that really is, got some great content and really has a lot of media, which I saw that, like, even Disney doesn't have enough content to be able to push what they were doing digitally from a marketing perspective, if you can believe that.
Could you explain?
Right. So when someone does a movie, right, they make a couple trailers and that content goes out, and they either pay for spots for those movies to be shown, but that's not enough content for social media. Social media requires tons of content. So I had a whole firm that was based on being able to try and get content out of the small amounts of little content they would provide you to be able to create something called a digital footprint. That digital footprint, now we're calling it something different. We're calling it a platform. So if I'm going to basically market anything these days, you've got to create your digital platform. He had enough content to be able to do that. So if he would have only written one book and I would have sit in that meeting and I would have saw that, I would say, look, that's okay. You're just like all the other authors. You've got one book. Good luck. But that's not what he had. He had enough content to be able to produce an entire platform, and that's what we did. So we basically built a digital platform underneath of it. We locked down the name Folktellers across every single channel, whether it's Pinterest, Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, you name it. You go to those channels, Folktellers is there. That's the platform, right? He's also surrounded himself with great people, and that's why when I met him, I was like, you need to build out the team. And I said, that's why we go to Hollywood, because that's where you're going to get those creatives. That's where the team is going to reside. So a really good friend of mine is Frank Zappa's son, Ahmet Zappa. He is now a folkteller, and he has the ability to open up multiple different doors. But he also has that creative background because he's written stories himself. He's produced movies. He basically knows how to navigate that. So that's why I said to him, let's not go the linear, traditional route. Let's bypass getting a publisher. Let's go directly to Hollywood. Let's get a proper legal representation, which is what we got, Loeb and Loeb. Matter of fact, our attorney is Michael Helfont, which used to be the president of Marvel, which we didn't even know that was who he was when we actually went into the room.
So it all fit in.
So this is a crazy story. So I'm sitting in at Loeb and Loeb, and we needed an attorney, especially an entertainment attorney. And if you look up Loeb and Loeb, they handle a lot of obviously the entertainment properties. So anyways, this fellow comes in. He goes, yeah, I'm going to bring Michael in. I'm like, yeah, okay. And this is John Frankenheimer, the guy that brought Michael in. And he said, yeah, Michael's just came back. He used to work in the industry, and now he's in the firm. So I'm taking my phone. I'm Googling his name, former President Marvel. I go, So I didn't tell him because I didn't want to. He was already nervous as it was, right? And so anyways, it turned out great. They ended up being a really good relationship. We secured them as our legal counsel. And that started to open up more and more doors. One of the critical things that I can say to any author is make sure that you have the right legal channels. Because people see it as like, oh, I'm just blowing money on legal. But no, they can open up doors that other people will never be able to open. And that's how the Reading is Fundamental program started, and many other things. So right now I have a very, very unique team behind them. So it's kind of, we're sitting in the parking lot, and I was saying it's not just digital platform, it's platform, it's people as a platform? That's what I call it. People as a platform. Because it's not just about building out the digital side of it, it's getting the team, so it's like a sandwich. It's like you've got both those pieces. So that's why we didn't go the traditional route. Yeah. We kind of did it 180, and it's working.
Yeah. And it's just, my experience, so Steve has done a lot of business out in Hollywood, and it was my first time out there, and for me, being a newbie and sitting in these meetings, there's a certain amount of culture shock, and I realized some things, like from a writers and literary people will appreciate this. We had producers come to us and say, typically this is not the way you do things in Hollywood. So we were kind of playing dumb because we didn't know what we had, and we were trying to validate, is this a viable concept, this whole, universe, this whole transmedia approach. And they said, usually someone comes with a pitch and it's like a one-page pitch and it's an idea. It's like you have a whole property and the property's done. Like, that's kind of genius. And we're like, I'm like, okay. They're like, why did you do it that way? And I'm like, I don't know. Something inside me said, don't go to market with this until you've played it out at least like the first series. So I spent really 8 years, writing that first series and not putting it out there. So.
Does this mean that the books and a movie and digital content all come out at the same time? Is that what's happening?
No. So what's happening now is, we kind of broke the mold and then went back and glued some of the pieces back together. So it's running two parallel paths. So we are following the traditional path. With everyone associated with the transmedia, they're like, okay, you do need to get a major publisher and you do need to launch the canon, which is this first series. There's something about a book that has gravitas that's foundational, because typically in the entertainment business, everything starts with the book. I mean, that's just the model. It's foundational and everything derives from it because there's something substantial about it. So that is happening, and so that's sort of the linear path that we went back to. But at the same time, there's all these X factor things that could either accelerate that or just kind of, everything blows up because now all of a sudden, it's immediately monetized. Not to be crass, but I mean that's what will happen. So that's all happening right now, and so we're following that path. We're getting the major publisher. We have to work and decide when the books will launch, but who knows, how that'll be accelerated now that you have streaming media, and what you're finding is entertainment and storytelling is being chunked and splintered into smaller and smaller pieces through apps and other platforms. And what this represents from a business standpoint, this is serialized storytelling content. So, the fact that you have a series of books, it translates very easily into any of this new media.
So in a sense, you guys are kind of reinventing what Dickens used to do for a living for a new age. I mean, you're kind of taking what's out there in terms of consumption and figuring out how the storytelling model fits into that. Am I capturing that?
No, that's spot on. And so the industry's still trying to sort that out. And so it's very, the conversations we have are very interesting, very compelling, because what's accelerated is the need for content, but the need for serialized content. And this is why what you're seeing is reboots of like series from the 70s and 80s, because they already own it. It's already serialized content, so they reboot it. So now you got Magnum PI and Chips and are all coming back with new tweaked storylines, but they have it already. We've talked about this. Another thing is with serialized content, binge watching has changed the game. Because before, with like a television series, that series was shot throughout the season. They may have been 2 or 3 weeks ahead. But now with binge watching, it's like a whole season has to be shot in advance. So you can imagine from a content standpoint how that's a game changer in how you need to acquire and get more content. And now there's so many platforms. And now there's new platforms coming out where they're going to be segmenting the content into even smaller bites. There's just a lot, but it's exciting. It's exciting because we've got good content, and it's already in serialized format. So,
tell us a little bit about that content. Like what? Tell us a little bit maybe about the first book, Excerpts from an Unknown Guidebook, and the Folkteller universe.
Sure.
The universe that you created.
Well, so let's start with the universe. This whole concept of in the Folkteller universe, Folktellers are people who travel time, space, and dimension to tell people the stories they need to hear. And the tagline for the universe is, whoever holds the story wields the power. So the stories themselves have power. And that's one of the messages. If you think about the target audience between 9 and 12-year-old, the idea that and Steve and I talk about this a lot when we go to schools, is that everyone's story is important, but you're accountable for it, and you are telling your story every day that you're living. So this goes back to, instead of being reactive, being proactive. What we're trying to encourage in a lot of the themes that we cover with the universe and in the series is, if you were to wake up every morning and realize, you're telling your story today, what's that story going to be? And how does that impact others? And how do you need to appreciate the stories that other people are telling, and find a way that, that these stories can interact with each other, and things can happen, and change can happen. So that's kind of a lot of the philosophy behind it. But then when you get into the actual story arc, you meet the protagonist named Aaron, he's just a regular 8th grader. In fact, the story begins with, says he suffers from middleitis. There's nothing that spectacular about him. There's nothing horrible about him. He's just an average kid, and the only really differentiator that he has is he has a really special relationship with his grandfather. And after school, on the way home from school, he always stops at his grandfather's and has an after-school snack, and his grandfather tells him a story. So it seems pretty innocent, and maybe even a little bit boring. But that changes very quickly when he learns his grandfather disappears, and he learns that he comes from a long line of folktellers who are traveling time and space to tell people the stories they need to hear, and that there's actually these shadowy forces from another realm that are always trying to prevent the stories from being told. And that not only are they trying to prevent those stories from being told, but they're trying to steal these stories, because in the shadow realm they also recognize that these stories have power. So that's really how the series begins, and you learn that there's 2 other groups. There are the travelers who help folktellers travel through time, space, and dimension, and then there's the guardians that are the protectors. So what happens in the first series, the series is called Excerpts from an Unknown Guidebook, and what you learn is that there's actually a master guidebook, which is the book of books that has been missing for over 1,000 years, and that this book was so powerful that it was actually broken up into different sections because it was too powerful. So it had actually been separated, and so what Aaron, Wendy, and Jake, and then there's in the series there's Eddie. It comes in. He's another guardian. What they have to do is they travel to find the missing pieces of the guidebook, and put it back together, while the shadow people learn the same thing, so it's sort of a race. And what's really interesting, so the subset action in all this is the shadow people, as they've come into this realm, this storytelling realm, they begin to become more than just shadows. They begin to tap into the folk tales and legends from around the world, and begin to manifest as creatures and monsters from folk tales and legends from around the world. So as the main characters travel to all these different places around the world to find, to put this book back together, they're confronted with these regional folk tales and legends.
Sounds awesome. I love the idea that the stories are being told to people who need to hear them. Are they somehow transformational or educational in some way, or?
Yeah. So what happens from the reader's perspective? So they're traveling to all these interesting places around the world. The reader gets to learn about these specific places, and they also get to learn about these regional folktales and legends that probably most of them have never heard of. We're dealing with archetypes here. And if you think about who the target audience is what I've learned about writing for this target audience is, if you give them a great story and you provide them the framework, they will fill in the blanks. They will fill in the details. They will begin to see themselves in these characters, and that's really the goal. And So this manifested, and this still blows my mind on how this is all occurring, how this is all rolling out, because it's more than I could have ever imagined. So, we really believe in the message that these stories tell. And so we did a project with, in Michigan, with 3 fifth grade classrooms. And what we did, and we wanted to keep this really simple, we worked with the teachers and the principal, and we came in and we said, we're going to give you copies of the first book, and we're going to have the 5th graders read it. And then what we want you to do is shoot a little 3 to 5 minute film of your own making, of your own theme, using the characters and some of the storylines from the first book. And what these young people came up with was it was mind-boggling. And we made it fun. We made it like a contest, and we had the Folky Awards. So we put their videos up on YouTube. We had people vote. We had a red carpet ceremony, and everyone got a trophy, and then the winner got the big Folky Award. But what was really happening was, if you step back from this, so we gave them these stories to read and interact with, and then empowered them and gave them the freedom to take some of those ideas and concepts and make them their own, and then tell their own story. They even did a really nice piece on Channel 4 in Detroit on how we were using technology, storytelling, really taking a transmedia approach. And I got choked up. I mean, some of what these kids said were like, I felt empowered. I felt like I was in control of my own story. So you go back to our philosophy of, own your story, live your story, tell your story. And here I get chills. The kids were doing it. I mean, like, before our eyes, it was, manifesting. And I was like, wow, are we tapping into something, like, powerful here?
A whole new view on grade 5 English class, yeah.
Yeah, and just like everyone's experience. I mean, it seemed so simple to do, but like what happened with us doing this was revolutionary. So and that's the type of program you could expand across the world, because what we actually did, you could write a rubric for it and have a little program in a box, and you could send it all over the world in 40 different languages or whatever, and it would be totally doable. These kids were just shooting their videos on their phones, but it was just amazing. It's just that if you get a chance, go to our YouTube channel, see, because their videos are up there. It was just amazing. I mean, to see that will come out of what started with just an idea.
That does sound astonishing. So 5 years from now, where do you hope the Folktellers universe is?
Okay, I'll answer and I'll let Steve answer, because he has a different perspective. So my vision has always been, this is a platform, as Steve said. So I am the creator. I'm already writing Series 2. After Series 2, what I want to do is I personally want to bring in other artists, other writers, other talented folktellers to play in the sandbox. And I take on sort of the role of steward. As I've told people, like anyone that's come into this universe, I make them read the book, and then I ask, what'd you get from it? And I'm just listening. I call it the echo. There's like 3 things that I look for and we've already talked about. It's like the power of stories. Respecting people as human beings and cultures, and all the things that these are part of all of our core values and a core belief in the folktale universe. And if they get it, then it's like, come on board, because what happens is this is a collaborative. So if people get sort of the essence of what we're doing, they'll take it in places I couldn't even imagine. And it's happening right now. I mean, Steve was one of the first. I mean, the places he's already taken the Folktellers universe to is like, it was beyond my imagination. I mean, I don't know how many times we've like looked in a meeting, we look at each other, we're like, wasn't counting on this. It's like, this is a whole nother, direction. But where do you see this in 5 years?
I mean, it's my vision is pretty well aligned with what yours is, I would say. I mean, it's obviously I see it more as a digital platform that you can bring people, directly into, and I mean, with writing sci-fi novels myself, I mean, I know this kind of fits just the young adult, but I mean, it could fit many different other areas other than just young adult. So we've talked about folk lords and other different names where it goes to different age groups. But the interesting thing about it is it's really open. We've had visions where we're sitting in Hollywood at some big events, and I won't say which one. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, this could be extremely big. Okay. And with the people, as I said, it's with the people that we're associated with and the team that we're building, really the sky's the limit of where this can go. And it'd be so nice to have that platform where you can help, young writers and bring them in. And if they've got a lot of content they've written but don't know what to do and they can't navigate the digital world today, which a lot of people can't, but they're really good creatives and really good writers, it's just a way of being able to help them, because both of us really do enjoy helping other people. I mean, that's first and foremost. It's not just about making a dollar. It's really about getting up every day and enjoying, what you're doing. And when I work with him, I really do enjoy every minute that I spend working on this. So.
Do you find that it's feeding your creative side? Because you talked about writing for yourself. Do you find that this is also helping your creative side?
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. My office downstairs is getting messier all the time because I'm an engineer by trade, and I've worked in automotive engineering and robotics for a lot of years, but I'm left-handed. So I'm like a left-handed engineer, which is kind of like two sides of the brain fighting against each other all day long. So, but my office, I mean, I was watching an article on Ray Bradbury the other day, and it was talking about like how does he come up with all of his ideas for sci-fi? Well, his office was an absolute mess. Things were all over the place, all different types of artifacts and creatures and all kinds of stuff. And he goes, I come up with my ideas. He goes, I just look around and I find them, And so I'm like, that gives me an excuse not to have him, a neat office anymore. So, but when I have conversations with Joseph, it's the same thing. So many different creative ideas come out of it. I mean, and we've talked about like the Mindset series and how to expand that into a platform. So it's like we're not even thinking anymore about how we write books. We're thinking about how we make platforms to launch books and launch stories. It's a completely different mindset, I'll say it, which is the name of one of my books. But it's changing that mindset and how you do things, how you launch things. And I think that it's revolutionary. I really do.
That's great.
So, Joe and Steve, when readers or viewers walk away from one of your Folkteller books or another part of the platform, what is it that you hope they take away with them? What do you want to get from the universe?
At a very primary level, we would love people to enjoy reading, especially people that might not really be avid readers right now. So, promoting literacy across the board, I think, is really, really important for us. And the love of stories, the love of storytelling.
And Steve, what about you?
Well, we haven't talked about this yet, but I do have dyslexia. And so reading, obviously, is very, very important to me and always has been all of my life. And not being able to read was very hard to overcome as I was young. So the whole thing of helping charities and that type of thing with literacy is obviously extremely important to me. And there's one nonprofit organization that we're dealing with right now called the Dream Centers, that we're actually doing a charity golf event in September, all geared around literacy. So.
And Joe, we'd love to hear some of your story, and
Sure.
We'll take that away with us. Please go ahead.
Okay,
Would you like to set up
thank
your
you.
reading?
Okay, sure. So let's begin in the beginning. On the back cover of this is Excerpts from an Unknown Guidebook. This is book 1, Phases of the Moon, and there's just a little poem in the back, but it really summarizes the entire universe. And it says, there's a story in the story like a wheel within the wheel, spiraling forever through the world we see and feel. There's a tale within the fable like a gear within the gear, marking time forever until the secret is revealed. And what that really says is there are stories within stories, and they're all intertwined, and it's one of the major themes and story arcs in the series. So I will begin with the prologue, where we begin to learn a little bit about who these folktellers really are. Now, I agree it may seem odd or even a bit self-absorbed for a folkteller like me to be telling you about stories and folktelling. However, if you think this is just an exercise in ego or self-oratory and grand gesturing, I must protest. I apply my craft of storytelling as my predecessors have done for millennia. I am no braggart, though I do pride myself in spinning tales of wonder and enchantment that will compel you to listen and read on. So I beg of you, dear readers and listeners, to join me as I share a story that speaks a little of the origins and struggles of my people. It's true that we are a mysterious and secret breed who are often forced to operate in the shadows, though we are bearers of light. We are the ones who share the stories that need to be heard with the people that need to hear them. And sometimes people don't want to hear what we have to say, and in such cases, things can get very interesting. For though we bear the message, we have no control of what will happen once the message is received. That's the odd thing about folktelling. I always know how things will begin, but I never know how they will end. So with that said, let's just begin. The following note was scrawled by a fugitive folkteller. Pages from his secret book have been scattered across various parts of the world. This section was discovered in a small-town library in the Midwest near an odd stack of loose papers. The story you're about to read was drawn from those mysterious writings. And then there's the note that says, "To whom it may concern. You don't know me and I don't know you. That's a good thing. I'll keep the stories coming for as long as I can. They must never find out that I'm doing this, that I'm opening up these pages to you. If I'm caught, it will mean my death. They think I'm a traitor, but I'm not. I have to do this. It's the only way to save us all. Read these stories, tell the others, and share what you've learned before it's too late. I will write again when I can. Yours in faith and confidence, X." Chapter 1. The Empty House. Every great adventure begins within the arms of an ordinary day. This adventure is no different. Aaron was a sandy-haired, slightly built teen from a quite unremarkable background. In fact, you might say that he suffered from midlitis. This was a non-medical condition from which many 8th graders suffered. Symptoms of this teenage malady included being invisible to girls, feeling nauseous in a public setting, and the general feeling that you were universally insignificant. Aaron's symptoms centered around the plain fact that he excelled at nothing, had no exceptional powers, and didn't have a single outstanding attribute. He was stuck in the middle of his class, in the middle of a town, in the heart of the Midwest, which might make you wonder, how could such an average teen ever amount to anything, especially a hero unlike any other? In reality, the only marvelous thing about Aaron wasn't even about him at all. It was his grandfather. His stories were amazing. Aaron would stop over at Pap's house almost every day on his way home from school. He knew the way so well, he could just let his mind wander as he walked. Even when he was blocks away, he could make out Pap's house like a pinpoint between the large shady trees. As he drew nearer, the house seemed to rise up out of the ground like a secret hidden place that only Aaron could see. The front door was never locked, and Pap usually could be found in the downstairs library reading through the many volumes of his leather-bound books. There was a great comfort in the dark brown woodwork along the hallway. Aaron anticipated making his way through the familiar corridor to find Pap either sitting behind his desk or sifting through his shelf of books. There was a standard ritual that had been created between Aaron and Pap. Aaron walked down the hall and yelled, "Pap, it's me!" In return, Pap would yell from the next room, "Ahoy, my boy! Come in and see me!" Aaron entered the library and Pap was there in his favorite houndstooth upholstered chair. There was a cold bottle of root beer and some cheese and crackers set atop the side table, as was the custom. A glass dish filled with peppermint candy laid off to the side for afterwards. Aaron sat down in front of the old chair, grabbed his root beer, and waited for Pap to flip through the pages of one of his many stories. The old grandfather clock struck its chime at 1/4 the hour. That single wonderful ring signaled the beginning of their daily ritual. For Aaron, this was always the best time of the day. At that brief moment in time, Aaron sat in anticipation of what would come next. He never knew what words would come out of Pap's mouth, but what he did know was that they would be magical, wonderful, and take him on a journey far from the mundane streets of Oakville. These were the thoughts that ran through Aaron's head as he stepped off the sidewalk and onto the front path of Pap's house. He'd really taken Pap's house for granted, even though Pap spoke about it with such great pride. It was a neat house on an old tree-lined street. As he approached the home, he never noticed the angled roof or the red bricks that led to the steps of the big front porch. Pap lived in one of those Sears Craftsman homes from over 100 years ago. It was the kind you could order from a catalog with all the materials and plans included. Pap had bought the house from the original owners, who had built the home all by themselves. But as Aaron approached the front porch, he wasn't sure why the old house was so important to Pap. The weathered door handle in his hand felt as familiar as ever as he squeezed it slowly and leaned in with the usual amount of pressure. The unlocked front door gave in with no resistance. "Pap, it's me!" Aaron yelled, as was the tradition. The teen waited for the standard response, but no answer came. So Aaron yelled again, a bit louder this time. "Pap, it's me!" As the echo from his voice faded, all that remained was the uneasy silence and the faint dust that floated through the afternoon sunbeams that danced across the hallway floor. This had never happened to Aaron before. His grandfather had always let him know that when he'd be going to town. On the days Pap was gone, Aaron knew to just head straight home. Pap would have never left the door unlocked when he wasn't around. Something just didn't feel right as Aaron crept through the hallway toward the library door. For the first time in Pap's house, Aaron was scared. His imagination ran wild with dark thoughts and crazy ideas as he peeked around the door jamb. He half expected to find Pap sprawled out on the floor, dead, perhaps murdered by some unseen intruder. Maybe the burglar was still hiding somewhere in the house, waiting for his next victim. Aaron blurred his eyes on purpose, not wanting to see what might be lying by Pap's favorite chair. As he slowly allowed his vision to clear, the teen was able to focus on the chair, the table, the fireplace, and the shelves full of books. To his great relief, there wasn't any dead body to be found. The room was completely empty and looked like it had been untouched for days. As it was Monday, Aaron hadn't been to visit since Friday, so Pap could have gone somewhere over the weekend. He tried to comfort himself with logical thoughts like this, but he couldn't help the overriding feeling that something was terribly wrong. The teen carefully made his way deeper into the library. He gently looked through the items on Pap's desk. After careful consideration of some loose papers and notes, Aaron decided that there was nothing of great interest there. He leafed through a few of Grandfather's books and found nothing. It seemed that Pap had left everything just as they'd always been, as if he was still there. Aaron left the library and began to check out the rest of the house. He wandered into the kitchen, the formal sitting room. No Pap. He ran upstairs and investigated each bedroom. No Pap. He even braved the gloomy basement that still frightened him a little. No Pap. The dejected grandson gave up on finding his grandfather for now. Aaron looked everywhere, and he figured it was time to head home and tell his parents about Pap's disappearance. If Pap was really gone, someone needed to do something about it, and quickly. As he made his way through the front hallway towards the door, Aaron passed the library once more. He peeked in again just to be sure he hadn't missed anything. As his eyes surveyed the entire room and returned back to the hallway, he noticed something that he hadn't seen before. Lying on the floor, halfway between the library entrance and the front hallway, was a small piece of parchment paper. The teen picked it up excitedly. There was something written on it. It was just one word, scribbled in Pap's handwriting with black ink. The cursive letters were looped together with long, dark ink trail at the end, and it simply spelled grandfather.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.